Hi everyone, and welcome to the video on basal bolus insulin adjustment. So if you're taking insulin 4 times a day, that is 3 doses of a mealtime or a short-acting insulin, and 1 shot of a long-acting or a basal insulin, then this is the video you need to watch to learn how to adjust insulin at home. So if you're still not sure if you're taking this kind of insulin regimen or not, sit with us and we can tell you which video to watch. So let's get back to class now and let's start learning how to adjust insulin. It's very easy and we'll take you through it step by step. If you still have doubts at the end of all of this, sit with us and we'll be happy to answer all your questions. So enjoy the class and we'll see you at the end. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, and welcome to the video on basal bolus insulin titration. So let's first see if you're taking this insulin regimen and if this video applies to you or not. If you're taking 4 injections a day, a short-acting insulin with breakfast, with lunch, and with dinner, so 3 times, and a long-acting or a basal insulin once a day, which may be either in the morning or in the night, this is called as a basal bolus insulin regimen. So how do you know if you're taking a short-acting insulin or a mealtime insulin before your meals? Well, I've mentioned the brand names of several insulins that are available today. So check if your prescription has one of these names. Actrapid, Insugen R, Huminsulin R, Insulin Rapid, NovoRapid, Fiasp, Papidra, Humalog, Eglosin Rapid. So the short-acting insulin in a basal bolus insulin regimen will be 3 injections. So before breakfast, before lunch, and before dinner. In addition to this, you will also be taking a basal insulin injection once a day, which may be in the morning or in the night. So what do we mean by basal insulin? It's a long-acting insulin, and these are the brand names that are in use today. So if you're on one of these injections once a day with 3 short-acting or bolus insulins with each meal, you're on a basal bolus insulin regimen, and you can use the information that we explain in this video to adjust insulin back at home. So the basal insulin examples are Lantus, Basalog, Basaglar, Tresiba, and Tojo. If you're still not sure if you're on basal bolus insulin, sit with us with your prescription and we can tell you which insulin adjustment video to watch. So when should you inject insulin? Now this is different for the short-acting insulins and for the basal insulin. So first let's look at the short-acting or the mealtime insulin, so the insulin that you take before the meal. Now this again depends on which insulin you're actually taking. Every insulin has slightly different pharmacological properties. So what that means is when you take the injection, how long it takes for the injection to reach the blood, for it to work, how long it works, the properties are slightly different. Some insulins need to be taken half an hour before the meal. Some need to be taken 15 minutes before eating. And some of the newer insulins can be taken just 1 to 2 minutes before the food or even after food. So since it depends on which actual insulin you're taking, sit with us with your prescription, or your prescription should contain these details. If it doesn't, sit with us and we will explain this to you in person. When should you inject the basal insulin? Now again, your prescription will have this. So usually we ask people to take it once a day. Rarely, it may also be given twice a day for people who require a larger amount of insulin. So if you're taking it once a day, we ask you to take it either in the morning or in the night. So stick to the same time daily. So if you've taken it at night at 10 p.m. today, you need to take it tomorrow night again at 10 p.m. But here also, there are some changes for some of the newer basal insulins. So if you're on some of the newer insulins, it is a little more flexible. So sit with us with your prescription and we can tell you exactly when you need to inject the insulin based on which molecule you're actually taking. So how does basal bolus insulin regimen actually work? How does it control your blood sugars? Now let's start off with the short-acting insulin. So you've taken the first dose of short-acting insulin in the morning before breakfast. What this does is it starts to rise after some time. It controls the sugars after breakfast here, your postprandial blood sugars, then the insulin levels gradually come down. So the insulin works from breakfast till lunch and controls the sugars at this time. So to cover you for the rest of the day, you need multiple injections. So the morning injection has finished its work by lunchtime. So you've taken a second injection before lunch. So this again starts to go up, controls the blood sugars after lunch, and gradually the insulin levels come down by about dinner time. So between lunch and dinner, your sugars are controlled with your afternoon dose of short-acting insulin. What about in the night? This is why you take the third dose of the short-acting or the mealtime insulin. So this starts to go up, controls your sugar after dinner in the night, and then slowly by early morning, about 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., the action of the insulin is over. And then, of course, you're also taking the basal insulin. So the basal insulin is a long-acting insulin. So there are going to be some gaps in between your short-acting insulin injection. So to cover all those gaps and to make sure that there is no point of time in the day where you don't get insulin, we take the basal insulin injection. So this works for 24 hours. So we take the injection once a day. So let's say you've taken it in the night. So small amount of insulin gets released continuously throughout the day, every single hour. So this is what basal bolus insulin regimen is. So think of this as insulin working in 4 different shifts. So the basal insulin is there throughout the day, working 24 hours. But in addition, you have the short-acting insulin coming in before breakfast, controlling the sugars between breakfast and lunch. Then you have the second dose of the short-acting insulin coming in the afternoon, controlling the sugars from lunchtime till your dinner time. Then you have the third dose of the short-acting insulin that you take before dinner, and this works till early morning, little after midnight. So which are the sugars that are controlled? Your fasting blood sugar is controlled with your basal insulin because that's the only one working early in the morning. You haven't taken any other injections at that time. You certainly haven't taken your morning injection. Your postprandial blood sugars are controlled with your morning dose of short-acting insulin. Your after lunch blood sugars are controlled with your afternoon dose of short-acting insulin. And after dinner, your blood sugars are controlled with your before dinner dose of short-acting insulin. So which are the sugars controlled? Your fasting sugar is controlled by your basal insulin. Post-meal, sugars are controlled by the insulin that you take with your food. That is your mealtime insulin. So PPBS is controlled by the morning short-acting insulin. After lunch, sugars are controlled by the afternoon short-acting insulin. And after dinner, sugars are controlled by the night dose of short-acting insulin, the dose that you take before dinner. So how long does your insulin work? Well, we already went through this. The exact duration of action depends on which insulin you're taking. So it depends on the properties of the insulin. But to understand how to adjust insulin, you could remember that approximately your short-acting insulin works for about 6 hours. So what you take in the morning is there from breakfast time to lunchtime. What you take in the afternoon is working from lunchtime till evening or dinner time. And what you take with dinner is working from your dinner time for the next 6 hours. Your basal insulin is working for 24 hours. There are some short-acting insulins which may work for an hour lesser, some which may work for an hour more. The basal insulin, some newer insulins work for longer than 24 hours, but that doesn't matter to you because the way you adjust insulin is really the same, even though the properties of some insulins are slightly different. So which sugars should we check in order to adjust our insulin dose? So we want you to check your fasting blood sugar, postprandial blood sugar, so 1.5 hours after breakfast, after lunch blood sugars, 1.5 hours after lunch, and after dinner blood sugars, 1.5 hours after dinner. In addition to that, we also want to make sure that there's no low sugar in the night. So we want you to check your sugars early in the morning. Usually we say between 2 to 3 a.m., but anytime from midnight till 3 a.m., you can check your blood sugars at that point of time. How often should you check? And the more often you check, the better it is. So you could check every day, and that's textbook. But yes, we understand that sometimes it's difficult to check every day. So what is the minimum that you need to do? We want you to check your sugars at least twice a week. So at all these times, not just fasting blood sugar one day, another day postprandial blood sugar. So fasting, PPBS after lunch, after dinner, and early morning 2 a.m. at least twice a week. If you can check thrice a week or 4 times a week, that's excellent because the more you check, the more we adjust insulin. And the more we adjust insulin, the longer we are in our normal glucose range. Other than these specific times, at any point of time, if you feel that you're having low sugar symptoms, we don't want you to guess. We want you to actually check your sugars and see if you have a low sugar. So what are the normal blood sugar values? Fasting, between 71 to 120 is normal. More than 120 is high and below 70 is low. After meals, after all the 3 meals, targets are the same. 71 to 180 is normal. More than 180 is high and below 70 or even equal to 70 is low blood sugar. So how do we adjust insulin? To control the fasting blood sugar, we adjust the basal insulin. So whether you're taking basal insulin in the night or in the morning, it doesn't matter. You adjust the basal insulin to control the fasting blood sugar. To control the postprandial blood sugar after breakfast, we adjust the morning dose of short-acting insulin. To control the sugars after lunch, we adjust the afternoon dose of short-acting or mealtime insulin. To control the sugars after dinner, we adjust the short-acting or the mealtime insulin that we have taken before our dinner. Remember, our fasting is controlled by the basal insulin. If you think of the sugars after food, it is controlled by the insulin that you take just before food. So if you want to control the sugars after breakfast, you adjust morning insulin. To control the sugars after lunch, adjust the afternoon insulin. To control the sugars after dinner here, you adjust the pre-dinner dose of short-acting insulin. So how do we adjust insulin? So as we said, in order to control the fasting blood sugar, we adjust the basal insulin. So we want the fasting to be between 71 and 120. So if your fasting is in the normal range, that means the amount of basal insulin you have taken is sufficient for you. So don't change the dose, continue the same dose. If your fasting blood sugar is more than 120, let's say 140, 160, anything more than 120, that means the amount of basal insulin you've taken is not enough for you. Therefore, your fasting is high. So what do we do then? So we increase the basal insulin dose by 2 units. So if you're taking 20 units, it becomes 22. Or if you're taking 34, it becomes 36. So whatever your dose is, you add another 2 to that. If your fasting blood sugar is low, below 70, that means the amount of basal insulin you've taken is a little more for you. So you reduce the insulin dose by 2 units. So whatever your insulin dose is, reduce from the current dose by 2 units. What about the sugars after food? We want it to be between 71 and 180. So let's look at after breakfast blood sugars first. So in order to control the PPBS, we adjust the morning dose of short-acting insulin because this is the one that goes up and controls your PPBS here. So if your post-breakfast sugars are normal, that means the insulin dose that you've taken with breakfast is sufficient. So don't change the dose, continue the same dose. If your PPBS is more than 180, let's say it's 200, that means the amount of insulin you've taken in the morning with breakfast is not enough for you. So you increase the dose by 2 units. If you have a low sugar here within this 6-hour window after breakfast and any time before lunch, your value is 70 or below 70, that means the amount of insulin you've taken in the morning is more for you. So reduce the dose the next day. You've already taken the injection that day. So the next day when you take your morning insulin, reduce the dose by 2 units. How do we control the sugars after lunch? To control the sugars after lunch, we adjust the afternoon dose of the mealtime insulin. So if your sugars after lunch are normal, 71 to 180, let's say it's 150, that means the amount of insulin you've taken in the afternoon is perfect. You continue the same dose, don't change the dose. After lunch, if your blood sugars are more than 180, it means the amount of insulin you've taken with your lunch is not sufficient. So you increase the dose by 2 units. On the other hand, if you have a low sugar after your lunch, before your dinner, at any time in this window here, it means the amount of insulin you've taken with lunch is a little more for you. You reduce the dose the next day by 2 units. How do we control the sugars after dinner? Well, the after dinner blood sugars are controlled by the mealtime insulin or the short-acting insulin that we take before dinner. So we want this value also to be under 180. So let's say we've taken the insulin here before dinner and 1.5 hours later, we check the sugar. If it's 160, 170, it's normal. You continue the same dose of mealtime insulin again the next day. So that means the amount of insulin you've taken is sufficient for you. After dinner, if your blood sugars are more than 180, it means the amount of insulin you've taken with dinner was not enough. So the next day you take 2 units more. So if you've taken 10 units, 10 plus 2, the next day it becomes 12. On the other hand, if you have a low sugar after dinner, it means the amount of insulin you've taken was a little more. So the next day you actually reduce the insulin dose by 2 units. So if you've taken 10 minus 2, you cut down to 8 units. So what should you do if you have a low sugar? The first thing is when you have low sugar symptoms, confirm that you actually have a low sugar. So check your blood sugar. If it is 70 or below 70, correct it with 3 to 4 spoons of glucose. And after that, have a snack. 15 minutes later, recheck your sugars to confirm if your sugars are normal or not. Then at that point of time, look at the time. If you have a low sugar between your breakfast and lunch, this is because of your morning dose of short acting insulin. That's the insulin working during this period. So the next day, you reduce your morning insulin dose by 2 units. If you have a low sugar between lunch and dinner, it means that this low sugar is due to your afternoon insulin because that's the insulin working in this point of time. So the next day, you reduce your afternoon short acting insulin by 2 units. Now, let's say you have a low sugar in the night, you're taking your basal insulin, plus you're also taking a short acting insulin with dinner. So you can reduce both the insulins by 2 units each in the night if you have a low sugar anytime in the night or early in the morning. Do not skip your insulin the next dose or next couple of doses if you have a low sugar. But if you have a very severe low sugar, let's say under 40, 50, and if there's a chance that you may have been unconscious and someone had actually had to help you to correct the low sugar, then come back and see us immediately because we need to figure out why this has happened and see what adjustments need to be made. So let's look at some examples. Now, we've asked you to take a mealtime insulin, 6 units with breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 times, and a basal insulin, 30 units in the night. When we check the sugars, the fasting is 160, post breakfast 260, after lunch 200, after dinner 200. So you can see that all are high. So fasting more than 120 is high, and after eating, anything more than 180 is high. Our fasting blood sugar is controlled by the basal insulin. So 30, we actually add 2 units to it because our fasting is more than 120. So 30 plus 2, we increase the basal insulin to 32. If you look at the sugars after all the 3 meals, this is more than 180. So this means that we need to add 2 units to the mealtime insulin. So to control the PPBS, we increase the morning injection from 6 units to 8 units. To control the sugars after lunch, we increase the afternoon injection again from 6 units to 8 units. To control the sugars after dinner, we again increase the night short-acting insulin from 6 units to 8 units. We check again. Our fasting is 130, post-breakfast 220, after lunch 190, and after dinner blood sugar is 180. So it's just there, it's borderline. Again, the fasting is not under control. So though it's coming down, more than 120 is high. So to control the fasting, we increase the basal insulin from 32 plus 2 to 34. After all our meals, it is still 180 or more than 180. So that is high. So to control the sugars after breakfast, we increase the morning short-acting insulin, 8 plus 2 becomes 10. To control the sugars after lunch, we increase the afternoon short-acting insulin, 8 plus 2 becomes 10. And to control the sugars after dinner further, we want it below 180. Again, night dose of short-acting insulin we increase from 8 to 10. We check again. Our fasting is higher than 10. So this is now in the normal range. So when our fasting blood sugar is normal, it means the amount of basal insulin we have taken is sufficient for us. So what do? We continue the same dose, 34. In the night, we continue the same. After meals, post-breakfast is 190. So that is more. After lunch and after dinner is 170, 168, which is in the normal range. So our post-breakfast blood sugar here is controlled by our morning dose of short-acting insulin. So because our PPBS is high, it tells us that the morning insulin dose is still not enough for us. So 10 plus 2, we increase it to 12 units. After lunch, it is normal. After dinner, it's normal. So it means the amount of insulin we have taken with lunch and with dinner are sufficient. So we continue the same doses, 10 and 10 with lunch and dinner. So the new dose is 12, 10, 10, and basal insulin is 34. So we check again. Our fasting is 90. Post-breakfast, 170. Post-lunch, 190. Post-dinner is 170. So since the fasting is normal, the basal insulin dose we continue the same because the fasting blood sugar is controlled by the basal insulin. After breakfast is normal. So after breakfast, sugars are controlled by a morning dose of short-acting insulin. So we continue the same dose, 12 units as it is. After lunch is 190, so which is a little more. So after lunch, sugars are high. So what do? The next day, we increase the afternoon insulin dose. So what you've taken here was actually 10 units, so you increase that to 12 units. And after dinner was normal, so that means the insulin you've taken before dinner, the short-acting insulin was fine, so you continue 10 units. When we check the sugars again, all the values are normal. So since all our sugars are in range, we don't need to make any changes to the insulin doses and it continues as it is. When we check again, our fasting sugar is low, it is 60. So what do we do when we have a low sugar early morning? We immediately correct the low sugar, take glucose, have a snack, and we make sure after 15 minutes we are normal. So what do we do when there's a low sugar? Any low sugar early morning or in the night, reduce your night insulins by 2 units each. So the pre-dinner mealtime insulin, 10 minus 2 becomes 8, and the basal insulin, 34 minus 2 becomes 32. After breakfast, after lunch, your sugars are normal. So you continue the same dose of mealtime insulin with breakfast and with lunch. So 12 continues as 12 in the morning and in the afternoon. So once you correct the low sugar, always look at the time. So early morning, remember the only insulin acting is your basal insulin. But since we want to avoid low sugars in the night, it is a good practice to reduce both your night insulins by 2 units. We check the sugars again, and what do we find? Our fasting is 96, which is normal. So the night dose continues as it is, 32. After breakfast is also normal. It's actually 120, but we have a low sugar here at noon, it's 70. So we correct the low sugar, eat a snack, become normal again. So if you have a low sugar in this 6-hour window, remember it is the morning short-acting insulin which is working at that time. So what do you do? The next day, when you take your morning insulin with breakfast, reduce the dose by 2 units. So 12 minus 2 becomes 10. After lunch, your sugars are normal, 140. So your afternoon insulin dose continues the same. And after dinner, your sugars are again 160, which is normal. So the amount of insulin with dinner is also normal. So you continue the same dose. Now, as you see, when you start taking insulin, the dose you need is very different from your starting dose. So we always start the low dose and gradually, once you get back home, we want you to keep checking your sugars to increase the dose. So keep checking your sugars every 2 to 3 days and gradually increase your insulin dose until you reach the normal blood sugar target. Even after you reach your normal goals, make sure that you continue checking your sugars and readjusting insulin. Also, once your sugar is normal, it doesn't mean that you can again just check your fasting. It is still necessary to check your fasting and your post-meal values multiple times in a week because we need to make sure that the sugars are normal throughout the day. Now, why is this a continuous process? Because our blood sugars keep changing constantly. It changes with our diet, it changes with our exercise, it changes with the amount of physical activity we have, even if it's not exercise, even our movement. It changes with our stress levels, hormonal levels, and even if you tell me that everything is the same, in any individual person, insulin absorption varies on a day-to-day basis also. Therefore, we need to keep checking our sugars in order to adjust our insulin dose to make sure that we stay within the normal target range. Because the more we adjust insulin and make sure we are in this normal range, the better it is for our health. So if you take home messages before we actually end this video, everyone requires a different dose of insulin. Now, I just showed you an example here where I said 30 units of basal insulin, 6 to 10 units of short-acting insulin. But there are some people who require 30 to 40 units of short-acting insulin with each meal. Some people who require 60 to 70 units of basal insulin. So a few may require just 5 to 6 units with a meal and someone else requires 40. So there's a lot of variation in every individual's insulin requirement. So let's not compare our dose with the dose our neighbor takes or the dose our relative or friend takes, because our body is different from another person's body. There's also nothing like a maximum dose of insulin. So that's what people often tend to worry about. You don't have to worry that your dose is going up. So let's say your sugars are normal with 10 units with a meal, good for you. But if it's not, please increase insulin because the right dose of insulin for you is the dose that controls your blood sugar. So until you reach your normal blood sugar target, we have to keep increasing the insulin dose. The insulin dose for you, remember, is defined as the amount of insulin that helps you get to your goal. Individual blood sugar targets, they also vary. Now, I've mentioned here that we want the fasting value to be under 120 and post-meal to be under 180, but this can be slightly different for different individuals. For youngsters, we may even say we want the fasting under 100, post-meal under 140. For someone older with a few complications, we may say we want the fasting up to 130 or 140 and post-meal even up to 200 or 210. So there are some variations. but you could use the same guidelines that we've explained here to adjust insulin. So sit with us with your reports to know what your individual targets are. Now, the targets for someone planning pregnancy and the targets for pregnant women are very, very different. So please sit with us separately. The bottom line is that insulin adjustment is necessary for everyone. Starting to take insulin does not magically bring our sugars down. If we continue the same dose that was written in the prescription, let's say a year ago or 3 months ago, we're not going to be under control. So, in addition to taking insulin, we need to constantly keep checking our sugars and we need to adjust insulin. So, let's all start adjusting insulin today because this is going to keep us healthy. Good luck adjusting insulin at home.